on this computer. Okay, hello, hi everybody. Thank you for joining again after our reading a few days ago. And yeah, I think today we're just going to maybe reflect on reading, on the project, on all of our chats, and maybe on the text that we've ended up with. And so I think we'll begin with image description. So we'll start with Leah.
Yeah, so we're all on a Zoom call, and this is a screen recording of the Zoom call. So there are 4 people in grid formation, and I'm in the top left. I'm Leah. I'm a white woman in her early 30s with long dark blonde hair and a black jumper on.
I'm Susanna. I'm a white woman in my mid-30s. I have blonde hair and a white t-shirt, and I'm in front of some plants and some shutters.
I'm Alice. I'm a white person in their 30s, and I've got long brown hair, and I'm wearing a brown jumper, and I'm on an orange sofa.
I am Sophie. I'm a pale person in their 30s with short brown hair. I'm wearing a black top and white headphones, and I'm sitting in my living room.
So yeah, I thought maybe a good place to start would be to just think about the process of reading out loud. So that was the first time that we've done it, and some parts as we were reading were voiced by people who I hadn't realised had written that section. So obviously we'd been collaborating on this document and uploading and adding footnotes, and certain bits. Suddenly a different voice attached itself to different texts, and that was really interesting to see that kind of the text had become its own thing, its own amorphous, growing body of words and thoughts. And I just wondered if you found that as well.
I definitely didn't know. So at times when I didn't know who was going to interrupt me and things as well because of the footnotes. And I liked at one point there was like a footnote in a footnote, or I didn't, like there was almost like it's like a spilling over, like there's too much to say, or it's interesting that some like material that's so kind of specific and personal could be kind of that applicable to multiple people.
I quite like the slippage between voices, and maybe thought I knew who'd written a text, and then it turned out to be someone else when we were all reading it out. But I also like the footnotes and like how it keeps generating like extra layers, but kind of keeps looping back into it as well.
Which fits with the kind of idea that we talked quite a lot about of crip-time or sick time, or like queer looping kind of warped kind of time that we all kind of live inside of in different ways, obviously, in different times it feels like different, but yeah, I mean, even kind of I think it's something that we've all said of like even when you're like used to living in that kind of time, it's still a surprise or something as well. So I think those interruptions, or they don't really feel like interruptions, they weren't like rude interruptions, but I think to say something and have someone not just agree or think it's interesting, but to say, I feel like that too, is actually quite unusual.
I think it's really important as well. Like, I guess because there's that moment where you have this bit of text, Alice, of talking about it always imagining tomorrow will be better, and then I've got that footnote that says that I like messaged you earlier this year saying, do you know this feeling, and that you had sent it right back to me, and that I still think about quite a lot. It's just a really clear moment of that being the case, but actually that's quite present throughout our shared text. I think it's like what we're saying, that thing of, yeah, that extra step beyond being understood, but also being almost having people say things before you can even say it for yourself.
Yeah, and that they felt them too, right?
Yeah.
Before they have, you know, that sense of it's all of these experiences, even though they are specific and personal to each person, like they've almost always been felt before by someone else. And I think to have that's such a kind of, I don't know, that to me is like a kind of interesting takeaway from the idea of crip-time, is that this actually, it's not just this looping kind of time for yourself. Like, it's not that you feel the same things over and over again, or you feel time dragging on a daily or weekly or yearly basis. It's that actually you might be in a time of someone else has already experienced, or you might be in a feeling that someone else has already had.
Yeah, and that by finding words, or trying to find words, or repeatedly like revisiting the failure of words, you're kind of contributing to a shared experience of finding language and of finding communication around something which is embodied or difficult, or, you know, firstly difficult to reflect on in yourself, and then also difficult to express maybe to a variety of different people that for one reason or another need to understand how you're feeling and why you're feeling it. And I think that's in the shared process of meeting and of speaking and of writing, that's something that I definitely found so valuable in this time as well, you know, a time of isolation, a time of, you know, where we speak of, you know, and Sophie spoke of silence, and I reflected on silence, and yeah, in this time of real kind of introspective silence, or in my experience of this time, that kind of these moments of sharing and of like breaking through words and language was really yeah, quite amazing.
I think as well, like diagnosis in itself can be quite, or like the medical language can be quite isolating, and or it can give you some idea of what you're going through, but not all like the specific details. And how we were all describing our embodied experiences, yeah, was so much more helpful, or feeling like yeah, empathy, or yeah, like someone else is going through it with you, so it made me feel less isolated. That connectivity.
Yeah, definitely. I was just thinking about a bit in the text, Sophie, where you're talking about the process of or like various processes that you have to go through in a medical setting of having to like fill out forms and answer specific questions. Like there's a bit where you say, what way did this online course Understanding X help you understand your condition better? And it's this like removed clinical way of trying to get at some meaning, but obviously within a wider system that's got its own priorities and is so separate from the person themselves in many ways, because you just like don't, how are you meant to answer that?
Yeah, I was really stuck on how to answer that, and I felt really exasperated. It's like, I don't understand what you want.
I also think, yeah, in that where you're also constantly referred to numbers, I always find that super interesting. It's like, we can't do words, but there's too much. The words are just, there's too many words. Let's just do 1 to 10. You're like, okay. And that there's this, yeah, this constant simplification into numerical format, because words are too slippery and confusing, and they might, you know, come out wrong or right, or, you know, fail you at different times. So yeah, I always find that quite interesting. And, you know, diagnosis, Leah, I think was, so when we began speaking about this, I had been in a reading group with Jo, who's curated this part of the programme at Almanac, and I asked Leah to, if we could read Leah's text on diagnosis, where you speak about Rumpelstiltskin, you speak about the power of naming, and it just stayed with me so much, like the the articulate power in a name and in speech. And you've got things like speech act theory and declaratives, but I just, in diagnosis specifically, and more, I think we've been living in like a real time of that, of being, diagnosis unfolding in a mass media format before our eyes, even today or yesterday with the vaccine and the allergy and all this language, having to communicate real-time action and activity. It just felt like a really interesting time to be reflecting on that, and a journey from the start of your text to kind of through our text and then to here.
Yeah, and like also a lot of my thinking about these things has been influenced by the people around me. So like, having spoken to all of you three in the part, like for a few years now, not just now, and like Alice is writing on ME and like all these things. Yeah, it goes like that. I don't know, feeding into one another and then developing and going away and thinking about it. Like, I feel like I've changed my mind about things quite a lot over the last few years, which I'm sort of encouraged by, because like now I'm 30, I'm like still changing my mind. But like being around other people and able to talk about these things, I think there's something, I don't know, yeah, it feels like there's something really important in that, like finding a language together and working it out together, but continuing to do so like on crip-time in this way that kind of feeds back and keeps evolving and might change. Yeah.
I was thinking about the same thing of changing your mind, or like it actually almost not just changing your mind a bit, but like almost full reversals of how I've understood something from the beginning of starting to write about illness, even though having had illness in my life for a long time. Like there's things that I just assumed were true. Like I didn't have language for illness when I was a child, and I just assumed that was true. Like until like 4 years into writing about illness, then I was like, no, I did have language. I was just not being asked the right questions, or I was not being, I wasn't given the right, context. I had my own language, but it wouldn't have made sense to the person asking the question. Like I didn't share the language that they were using in a medical context. So then it was like, oh, well, hang on, I did. It's not that if you're ill or if you're in pain you lose language necessarily. It just doesn't sound like, it's not, maybe not as comprehensible, or it's not as comfortable. Maybe it's just not, it's not nice to listen to. Maybe it sounds kind of like horrible, or maybe it sounds like I don't know, just like annoying or scratchy or something. Like maybe it's just too abrasive a language. It's not that I didn't have any, it's just that I didn't have the right one to respond in the right way. So it's that, I mean, that was after like thinking, going from thinking that I had no language to thinking, oh, I probably did have language. Like that's actually quite a big difference. And it took so long to kind of understand that, or kind of believe that, to change that belief, I think, because I was still kind of gaslighting myself into thinking that I just couldn't say what I meant, or I couldn't, but that, that was just me blaming myself again, for actually quite a really long time, for not being able to answer that silly question of, how has this made you understand your condition better, or whatever. You just think, well, why can't I, answer that question?
I think that's
a silly question.
About where Leah writes about something coming into speech and it becoming visible, and that's sort of both like a fixity and a kind of losing of it. And I guess because you were talking about childhood and finding language, that there are other responses, or I guess I recount like an experience of kind of selective mutism, and that being a different kind of language, but because you didn't articulate yourself verbally or in a specific way, it wasn't wasn't understood. Sorry, I cut you off, Susanna.
No, well, it's apt actually, because I was about to say about the bit where you say when there's a gap in conversation and people fill it. No, but I also was about to do it. And yeah, I think something about what Alice is saying is also regarding time. Is also regarding the time for diagnosis, the time to listen to somebody that is attempting to articulate something. And the entire medical profession is structured around a lack of time, and a scarcity of time and resources as well at this stage. And so there isn't time to listen, really, and the structures for listening are poor. And yeah, I think I definitely noticed with my mum, which I talk about, her language slowed and stuttered and changed, but if you take the time, you get there. But of course, no one has that time. No one in a shop has that time. A doctor doesn't have that time. So you end up, or she ended up very much just kind of stopping speaking, whereas actually she could speak, but just on a completely different communicative level. So yeah, I think also the time to find words, or the time to not fill those gaps, we just don't have a structure for it.
That makes me think of, there's this person whose name I can't remember now. Perhaps I can find out afterwards and add it into footnotes to the video, who has this concept of temporal access, because I can't remember their pronouns, I'm going to say they and them, because they stutter, and it often puts a lot of time in between words and in between sentences, so you have to stay with it. And they do this lecture where they're talking about this, I think it's in Brazil, there's a phone company, maybe it's the national phone company, gives 3 minutes to people who have a stutter so that they can get to the same place, with that allowance for that extra time. And was just talking about that as I think they call it temporal access.
Yeah, one of the things that when I started working with Leah and Sophie, and I think you're kind of doing the labour in this, but it's sort of saying, I can talk now for this period of time, and then I will leave, and having this very structured and having to communicate those boundaries is also that sort of level of communication, and that takes, I imagine, a long time to find validity and to find a support network around creating those structures for time and for your own kind of needs. And I think that was something that Alice and Leah, you also mentioned in our first call. I think, Leah, you were reflecting on Alice and how how Alice deals with something.
Yeah, I've learned so much from so many people. I'm still learning, but I think Alice is I just have to try and channel Alice when I try and set boundaries.
Right, Leah, we're not doing that.
Exactly.
Actually, you're going to do that, not us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think observing and then kind of, being in more direct dialogue with all of you, and in more of an organisational dialogue as well, that's been super helpful as well, because why don't we put more time and space and care around things and around structures? And that's what Sophie mentions as well in the text, and I think it's Sophie's. But about, you're sitting in a meeting and they're talking about how to make things better, and you're just there wondering about how to navigate a way home on your energy levels. And I think that's all really important and prescient, and it has also been a really kind of like a sort of a journey for me to also understand and interact and learn about that. So it's really good. So based on energy levels, so I think maybe we can close soon, and just think, perhaps reflect a little bit on if there's anything to close with, perhaps anything on this idea of care, the structure of care, or Alice, as you've identified the thing that we have sort of made.
Yeah, I guess it this thing that we can't really figure out a way of saying the right, I mean, finding the right like words to say it, but that kind of positioning the text that we've kind of produced, and I think that's why we're recording this is why we're recording this conversation as well, because I think for me, I definitely, when we all read the text all together, I thought, you know, this is a great text, but it doesn't, it's not like the end product of this kind of collaboration that we've kind of been doing. So it kind of felt more like a byproduct or a kind of offshoot or something that just has fallen off the real work, which is this kind of care support structure that we've maybe it's a temporary structure, or maybe it could carry on, but it felt the text feels more like related, like an arm or something to the body of the care structure. It feels like a byproduct, not the real thing.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But yeah, whether that whether it's something that we could maintain, or whether it's something that can just be like picked up occasionally, I think that's the way we're probably all used to working and caring anyway. So, and yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and I do.
Can't say it basically.
It's a structure. It's a structure with meanings. But I do think the language as well, or the space for language, the space for writing, you know, like I always wrote actually after our meetings, and it made me realize that that's when I write is after I've spoken with people and had thoughts, not on my own in a void. And so yeah, I think that space and then the resultant text is almost like a document of a period of time, and a document of a series of thoughts that have happened over a very specific time in history and, you know, our lives, is important. It's nice to have a record and also a structure.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody. And yeah, see you soon.